Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who is not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing occurs except by his will, both good and bad, he destined to happen. He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light, he's not a spirit, he has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled master, Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension, and help us to put our knowledge into practice and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. We're continuing in the book, the Hadrami Introduction, Al-Muqaddimah Al-Hadramiyya, written by the Allama Bafadl, rahimahullah. It is an introductory text in the fiqh of the Shafi'i madhab. In the text, we've made it to page 10. Page 10. We've made it to the section entitled Prohibited Acts. Page 10, down at the bottom. In this section, we're going to talk about, we're continuing the discussion about minor hadath. Okay, so if you review a little bit, if you go back to page 5, we started talking about wudu. Okay, wudu is what you do to remove minor hadath from your body. And we started by talking about the obligatory aspects of wudu, of which there are 6. Then we started talking about some of the recommended aspects of wudu. Okay. Then we mentioned some of the things that are disliked to do in your wudu. Then we mentioned some of the conditions, some of the things that are not part of the wudu, but nonetheless, if these conditions are not satisfied, your wudu will not successfully remove the minor hadath. Then we talked about a special case of foot gear, where if you have foot gear, then you're able to perform a wudu without washing the feet, but instead by wiping on the foot gear. Then the last time we had class, we talked about the things that nullify your wudu, or again, to put it a bit more precisely, these are the causes that cause minor hadath to come upon your body. And we talked about the 4 causes that cause minor hadath, or again, to put it in layman's terms, the 4 things that break wudu. Now, we're still talking about this general subject, minor hadath, and how you get rid of it, the rules pertaining to removing minor hadath. And now we're going to go into prohibited actions. There are certain things, that are haram for you to do if you have minor hadath. Meaning if you do not have wudu, there are certain things that are haram. Okay? They're not haram if you have wudu, but they're haram if you do not have wudu. Okay? If you have minor hadath, these things are haram. But if you've performed wudu to remove that minor hadath, then these things are permissible. What are these prohibited acts? The things that are forbidden for you if you've broken wudu. It says, with the minor ritual impurity, minor hadath, it is prohibited to perform salah and its like. Okay, so the first thing that's forbidden for you if you've broken wudu is that it is haram for you to perform salat. Okay, salat here includes, salat in general, whether it is like a 4 rakah salat, like Dhuhr and Asr, whether it's a 3 rak'ah salat like Maghrib, a 2 rak'ah salat like Fajr, and like many of the Sunnah salats. It doesn't matter if it's a 1 rak'ah salat like Witr. It doesn't matter if it is a salat that has a different format, like the eclipse prayer. Okay? Any kind of salat is forbidden if you don't have wudu. It says, and it's like. So that means the janazah salat is also forbidden. The sujood of tilawah, many of you know that in the Quran there are 14 ayahs where if you recite that ayah or hear someone else recite that ayah, it's sunnah for you to do a sajda. This sajda is called a sajda of tilawah, sajda of recitation. Okay, this sajda also is similar to a salat. You need all the conditions of salat are true for it. So you need to have wudu, you need to be facing the qibla, etc. Okay, it starts with a takbir and it ends with a salam, the same way salat does. So sajda of tilawah is similar to salat. There's also one ayah in the Quran where it's sunnah to do a sajda, but this sajda is not because of the recitation. It's a sajda of shukr. It's a sajda you do out of gratitude, thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The sajda of shukr also is like salat. All of these things are forbidden if you do not have wudu. What I mean by that is it's haram. You know, and this is something that a lot of us as parents really have to pay attention to, because sometimes our kids will be lazy. You wake them up in the morning, you tell them make wudu and come and join with the family when you pray Fajr, for example. And sometimes the kids will come down and they didn't even make wudu. You know, they didn't even do that. You know, they need to understand that if you did not make a wudu, then entering into the salat is actually a sin. It's not merely like, it's not like no big deal. It's a sin. Now, obviously, if the child is not yet accountable, then, you know, this sin isn't written for him. But nonetheless, everyone, even adults, sometimes try to get slick. They don't have wudu. They don't want other people to know they don't have wudu. So what do? They get in the salat line and they pray. And in their mind, they're thinking, oh, I'll just repray it later alone. Then nobody will know that I broke my wudu. This is not a good attitude to have. Entering into the salat while you don't have wudu, this is haram. It's sinful. It's something you need to repent from. And in fact, some scholars said that the one who knowingly enters salat without wudu, and he has no excuse, that this person is just playing with the religion. Okay, what they mean by that is that this is kufr, that the person stops being a Muslim. All right, don't enter the salat without wudu. This is something you must take care to never do. What's next in the list? It says it is prohibited to perform salah and it's like. Then it mentions tawaf, circumambulation. Tawaf is when the Muslim goes around the Kaaba 7 times. Okay, tawaf also it requires a state of purification. So if you don't have wudu, then it is haram for you to make tawaf. It says, and carrying the mushaf. Okay, the mushaf, as many of you know, is the book that has the Quran written in it. That book is called a mushaf. It is haram for a person who doesn't have wudu to carry the mushaf. It says, and touching its papers. So just like it's haram for you to pick up the mushaf and carry it in your hand, it's also haram for you to touch any one of the pages of the mushaf. It says its margins. That means even if you touch the page, but not on the part where the Quran is written, you touch it on the margin and the part that's blank, even that is haram. Even though there's no Quran written there, it's haram for you to touch the margins of the page as well. It then says leather, meaning the cover of the book. Okay, the cover of the book is also forbidden for you to touch if you don't have wudu. Then my copy here says carrier and kharita, but those words should actually be reversed. The original text says kharita first and carrier second. Um, but what is a kharita? Okay, a kharita is like a cloth case. It's like a case made of cloth, and it's especially made for the mushaf. So you insert the mushaf into this cloth case. This cloth case is called a kharita. If the mushaf is inside of this cloth case, then it's haram for you to touch the cloth case. It says also carrier. By carrier, the Arabic word here that's used is alaqa. The alaqa is like a cord. It's a cord that you can hang the mushaf by. So if you want to hang it to ensure that it's in a high place, some mushafs in the past used to come with a cord that you can use to just hang it like from the ceiling or something. That cord that's used for hanging the mushaf also is something that you cannot touch unless you have wudu, assuming that the mushaf is hanging from the cord. If the mushaf is hanging from the cord, then you can't touch the cord. Otherwise, you can. Lastly, it says, and its box. Okay. Sometimes there are mushafs that are made, and there's a special box that's made for it. It's made especially to hold that particular mushaf. It's sized perfectly for the mushaf to fit inside the box. And then you can close the box. It's like a wooden box, and it has, decorative, decorations and stuff around it. This wooden box, if it was made for the purpose of housing a mushaf, then also this box, if the mushaf is inside of it, it is haram for you to touch the box without having wudu. This word here, alaqa, which means cord. Someone asked me to repeat it. This word, it doesn't mean cord. Okay, it refers specifically to a cord that's used to hang a mushaf. It's not like a general word for cord. MashaAllah. So you see here some of the things that are forbidden if you do not have wudu. You can't make salat or anything like a salat. You can't do tawaf. You can't carry a mushaf, and you can't touch the mushaf, nor can you touch any of the things that are particular to that mushaf if the mushaf is in it, such as a cloth case or a hanging cord or a wooden box. It says also, what has been written for a Quranic lesson, even if on a cloth. There are people who, in the past, this was common, but even today, there are some parts of the world where people do this, where if you go to learn Quran from a teacher will write for you a certain amount of Quran. It might be on a sheet of cloth, or it might be on like a tablet of some kind. And maybe in some schools, the student writes it and the teacher just checks it. But a certain amount of Quran will be written on like a cloth or a tablet, and then you, the student, will go memorize it. Okay, so even though that's not an entire mushaf, it's just like a portion. It might be, 5 to 10 ayahs, for example. You have a portion of the mushaf written there for the purpose of you studying it so that you can memorize those ayahs and learn it. This thing also is haram for you to touch it unless you have wudu. Okay, what's been written for a Quranic lesson if it's Quran that was written for you to study it, then it's also like a mushaf. It says it is permissible to carry it in luggage, not intending it specifically. Okay, so let's say you're traveling somewhere. You have a mushaf. We already said it's forbidden for you to carry the mushaf. Okay, but what if instead of carrying it in your hand, you have it in a piece of luggage with a whole bunch of other stuff? You got clothes in there, you got little perfumes and trinkets or whatever else you have in your luggage. You have the mushaf in there with the rest of the luggage. Is it permissible for you to carry the luggage while you don't have wudu, knowing that there's a mushaf inside? Doesn't that count as carrying the mushaf? Didn't we already say carrying the mushaf is forbidden? Well, in this case, if the mushaf is in your luggage with a lot of other things, here we need to ask ourselves, what is your intention by carrying that luggage? Okay, if really the only thing you want to carry is the mushaf, you're only carrying that other stuff with it just so that you will be allowed to lift it without wudu. In that case, it's haram for you to carry it. Okay, but as long as it's not your intention to move the mushaf alone, as long as it's your intention to move everything, like if you're traveling from one country to another, that luggage, you didn't put the clothes in there just to allow you to carry the mushaf. You put the clothes in there because you're going to wear those clothes when you when you reach your destination. Okay, so you're not intending only to carry the mushaf. You're intending to carry all of those things. In that case, you can carry the luggage even without wudu. Even without wudu, you can carry the luggage. What's an example of a person doing it, trying to carry the mushaf in particular? Trying to use this, trying to find a loophole here. It would be like, imagine somebody who left the mushaf on the dining room table. There's a stack of books there. There's like 4 books with the mushaf on top. And, someone needs to clear the table. No, let's not even say clear the table. Let's just say someone wants to read the mushaf. He wants the mushaf to be brought. Say the father says to the teenager, bring me that mushaf. And the teenager doesn't have wudu. The teenager might think, oh, I can't touch the mushaf because I don't have wudu. But then he might think, but if I carry the whole stack of books, that way I can just touch the books that are below the mushaf without touching the mushaf, and I can carry the mushaf over to my father like that. This is haram. Okay, this is what they mean when they say you're carrying the mushaf along with other things, but your intention really is just to carry the mushaf. The only reason why you picked up those other books that were below it was so that you could avoid touching the mushaf. But really, the only thing your father asked for is the mushaf. And the only thing you're really doing is carrying the mushaf to him. You're just trying to be slick by trying to find a loophole to avoid touching the mushaf. In this case, there's no loophole like that. In this case, you're considered to be carrying the mushaf, which is the first thing we mentioned. We said carrying the mushaf is haram, and then we talked about touching the paper, the margins, the leather, etc. But carrying it while you don't have wudu is haram. So in this example, what that teenager did when he tried to be slick, he carried the books that are below the mushaf with the mushaf on top and brought the whole stack over to the father. This is haram because it counts as carrying the mushaf. Okay, it would have been permissible if he truly intended to carry all of it. Like if he needed to clear the dining room table for dinner and he just picked up the whole stack of books and moved the entire stack over to the bookcase. This would be permissible as long as he doesn't touch the mushaf, because it's not his intention to move only the mushaf. His intention is to move the entire stack. All right, so this counts as the mushaf being with other things, and his intention is to carry the whole lot of things, not only the mushaf. This is permissible. Okay, so if you're going shopping and you buy a mushaf and they put the mushaf in a shopping bag, you need to have wudu to carry that shopping bag. But then as you keep shopping and you put more and more things in the bag, you put a sweater in there, you put some other books in there, you put some pens in there, whatever else you put in there, you put a bunch of other things in the bag. Well, then now it's your intention to carry the entire bag full of stuff, not only to carry the mushaf. So if you break your wudu, you can continue to carry that shopping bag. He then says, and this is important, so please pay attention here. He says, it is permissible to carry the tafsir, which amounts to more than it. Okay, this is like a sentence that needs some explanation. When he says tafsir, he's referring to tafsir as it existed in his time. Okay, in his time, tafsirs were written where the ayahs of the Quran and the tafsir were all mixed together. Okay, they were all mixed together. Like there are some ayahs and then some tafsir, then some ayahs and some tafsir, then some ayahs, then some tafsir. That's what he's referring to when it's intermingled. He says it's permissible to carry a tafsir that's like that if the tafsir, like the amount of letters used for tafsir, are greater than the amount of letters used for the ayahs. Okay, if the tafsir is longer than the actual mushaf, like the words, the letters of the ayahs, well, then you can carry that tafsir. Because in that situation, that book is not considered to be a mushaf, it's considered to be a tafsir. Okay, but this is not the case with some of the tafsirs that we print nowadays, where we print like a complete mushaf page within the tafsir. For example, if you look at this tafsir, okay, this is an example of a tafsir where there's like a complete page of the mushaf right here, and the tafsir is written over in the margins. Okay, if you have a book like this, you need to have wudu to carry this book. Okay, this is considered a mushaf with tafsir in the margin. And if you don't have wudu, you cannot carry the mushaf, and you cannot touch the pages of the mushaf, not even the margins where the ayahs may not be written. There may be something else written in the margin, but this is just the margin of the mushaf, because this text, this printing has just a page of mushaf with no tafsir intermingled with it. There's no tafsir intermingled there. It's just a pure page of mushaf. So this book is considered to be a mushaf, and you need to have wudu in order to touch it. As opposed to, for example, a tafsir like this one, where you see it has some ayahs at the top, and then a bunch of tafsir explaining those ayahs. And then after all of this tafsir of those ayahs, it gives a couple more ayahs, and on the next page it'll give tafsir. Okay, so if you have a tafsir like that one, where there's ayahs, and then tafsir, and then ayahs, and then tafsir, it's intermingled. In that case, we just ask ourselves, is the tafsir greater in length than the ayahs alone? If so, then that book is considered to be a tafsir. And you do not need to have wudu to carry a tafsir. Okay, but you need to see, if it counts as a mushaf or not. Is that clear? This part about tafsir? Okay. It says, and to turn the papers with a stick. This one also is tricky. He's saying here, it is permissible, if you do not have wudu, to turn the pages of your mushaf with a stick. So if you have your mushaf sitting on a stand in front of you, and you're reading it with your eyes without touching it, and you need to turn the page without touching the page or without touching anything, if you have a stick and you can turn the page using the stick, this is permissible. But on the condition, that you're not carrying the page with the stick, because carrying the page is haram, whether it's done with your hand directly or whether it's done with a stick or something else. To carry it is haram. So if you intend to flip the page with a stick, it cannot be because you put the stick under the page and then you lifted the page up and flipped the page over. That would be haram even with a stick. Even with a stick, that would be haram. But rather, if you had the book open in such a way that you could just kind of like nudge the page from the side without picking it up with the stick, but just kind of nudge it with the stick, and then it will on its own fall over. This is what they mean when they say you can turn the paper with the stick. They don't mean you can lift the paper with the stick. They mean you can turn the paper with the stick without lifting it. Inshallah. And lastly, well, here at the end of the paragraph, he mentions a special rule that applies to children who are not yet accountable. It says the child who can differentiate. Okay, so a child who's mentally discriminating, a child who's old enough that he understands what he's saying, he understands what he's doing. If you speak to him, he can respond in a reasonable way. This type of child, okay, he's a child, all right? That means he hasn't hit puberty yet. He's still a child. He's not accountable yet, but he can understand what is said to him and he can respond reasonably. This type of child, if he carries a mushaf for the purpose of study, or he carries like a tablet that has ayahs written on it for the purpose of study, even if he breaks his wudu, we as the adults, we don't stop him from touching the mushaf or his study tablet. Okay, because he's a child, we allow him to touch the mushaf and study the ayahs even without wudu. Why is that? It's because we want to encourage him to study, and having him constantly make wudu every time he breaks wudu is something that might be a hardship on him. And we want him to get his studying done. And he's not accountable yet. Okay, so for him to be touching the mushaf without wudu, it's not being held against him yet because he's not yet accountable. Okay, so we allow him to do this, but the moment he becomes accountable, this exception goes away. The normal rules apply. He needs to have wudu if he's going to touch a mushaf or any of the things that we mentioned. This is the list of things that are prohibited if a person has what? If a person has broken their wudu. It means you can't make salat or anything similar to salat. You can't make tawaf, and you can't touch the mushaf or any of the aspects we mentioned, nor can you carry the mushaf directly or indirectly. Okay? However, you're allowed to carry it as long as you're carrying it with a bunch of other things, and your intention is to carry the lot of it, not to only carry the mushaf and those other things are just there because you're looking for a loophole. No, if your intention is to carry all of it, then in that case, you can carry the mushaf without touching it. And we mentioned that a tafsir, if the tafsir is intermingled with the ayahs and the tafsir is longer than the ayahs, then in that case, that book is considered a tafsir. So you can carry it, even without wudu. But if the ayahs are longer than the tafsir, or if the ayahs are written together in a, like without the tafsir intermingled between them, then in that case, it's a mushaf. And the regular mushaf rules apply. The next thing that he mentions at the end of this section is he mentions an important rule. It's like a principle in the Shafi'i madhab as well as other madhabs, which is a very important rule for you to understand. And if you understand it well, it'll make your life much, much easier. It says, whoever is certain of purity, but has doubt about minor ritual impurity, or is certain of ritual impurity, but doubts purity, builds on certainty. What does that mean? Okay, there's a general principle in the madhab that says certainty is not overruled by doubt. Certainty is not overruled by doubt. Yes, that's correct, sister. Side-by-side translation is not considered intermingling. Certainty is not overruled by doubt. Okay? What does that mean? It means that if you know something for certain, but you have a doubt about a matter that might change the ruling, then you ignore the thing that you have doubt about and you stick with what you know for certain. An example would be like if you make wudu. 1 second. MashaAllah. Camera's blurry now. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So an example of this principle in practice would be like if you made wudu and you know for certain that you made wudu, right? You remember clearly, you made wudu, you know it's true. But you made that wudu like 5 hours ago. And now it's time for you to make salat. And you're sitting here thinking, man, it's been 5 hours since I made that wudu. Did I go to the bathroom since then? You're thinking, you're not sure. You're like, I think maybe I went to the bathroom. But you're not sure if you did or not. You have doubt whether you broke your wudu or not. You're not certain whether you broke it or didn't break it. In that case, what do? You ignore the thing that you're not certain about. The thing you have doubt about, you ignore it. Okay, in this example, you have doubt whether you broke wudu, so you just ignore that and you go with what you knew for certain. And what you know for certain is that you did make wudu, and you don't know for certain you broke it. So what's the ruling of the madhab in this case? You say, I have wudu. Okay, you conclude, you judge, you rule that you have wudu because you know for certain that you had wudu, and you don't know for certain you broke it. All right, this is a principle that you go with what you know for certain and ignore whatever you had doubt about. It also works in the reverse. So if you went to the bathroom, you know you went to the bathroom. All right, so you know that you had minor hadath for going to the bathroom, and you're trying to remember if you made wudu after that. After you went to the bathroom, did you make wudu or not? You think maybe you did, but you're not sure. In this case, you ignore the part you have doubt about, and you go with what you know for certain. So you would conclude that you do not have wudu, because you know for certain you broke wudu, and you don't know for certain you made wudu. So in that case, you simply say, I do not have wudu. Okay, this rule, it applies not just for wudu, it also applies for other things. You know, if you're walking down the street and somebody is walking their dog and the dog brushes up against your leg. Okay, well, your pants are dry, the dog is dry. Okay, so if your pants are dry and the dog is dry, that means no contamination took place, right? But the dog's nose is not dry. A dog's nose is moist, right? If the nose is what touched your leg, then in that case, your pants have been contaminated with najasa and you can't make salat, right? So what sometimes happens is you're walking down the street, you feel a dog bump into your leg, and you don't know, did the nose touch your leg or was it some other part of the dog? You don't know. Okay, so what that means is what you knew for certain was that before that dog touched you, you were not contaminated with najasa. You knew that for certain before. After the dog touched you, you're not sure if you became contaminated because the dog is dry. It's just his nose or tongue that might have been moist, and you don't know that the nose or tongue is what touched you. So you have doubt whether you're now contaminated or not. So what's the ruling of the madhab? You ignore the thing you have doubt about, and you go with what you know for certain, which is, in this example, that you're not contaminated. And you just go and you make your salat because you don't know for sure you got contaminated. What's another example? You made wudu. You know you have wudu. When you go to the store, the cashier hands you your receipt. The cashier, who's the opposite sex from you, hands you your receipt, and this person's hand touches the skin of your hand. Okay, and we know that in the Shafi'i school, if it's skin to skin, that breaks your wudu. But in this case, you're not sure whether it was the skin that touched your hand or whether it was the fingernail that touched your hand. You're not sure. Was that skin or was that a nail? Well, in this case, it means you're not sure that your wudu was broken, but you know for sure that you had wudu before that. So you ignore what was uncertain and you stick with what was known for certain. All right. This rule, once you understand it, it makes your life much easier, much, much easier. But you need to be sincere. Okay. You need to really, truly, consider whether you really have doubt about it, or are you just claiming to have doubt about it so that you don't have to go make wudu or you don't have to wash something. Okay. It needs to be something you truly have doubt about. Okay. Remember, we don't learn this Islamic law just to look for loopholes in the law. Right? We learn the Islamic law for us to use it properly. Okay. And that means you need to be honest with yourself. Insha'Allah ta'ala. Any questions about this section, prohibited acts? Well, if you do have a question, just drop it in the box. Let's see if we can bang out this next section real fast as well. It says recommended aspects of wudu. This chapter title, I think, is sort of a strange title because it's not talking about aspects of wudu at all. It's talking about times and situations when it's recommended for you to make wudu. Okay, we all know you're obligated to make wudu if you break wudu, right? You're obligated to make wudu before your next time making salat. But there are times when, even though you still have wudu, it's recommended for you to make wudu anyway. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. So my recommendation, if I were going to name this section, I would name it causes of recommended wudu. Like the causes that because of it, wudu becomes a recommendation for you. It becomes sunnah for you to make wudu in these cases. He says, may Allah have mercy on him, it is recommended to do wudu due to having blood taken. Okay, so one of the cases where it's recommended for you to make wudu is if you've had blood drawn. Okay, blood drawn like for a medical procedure, like you're giving blood, for example, or your blood was drawn for them to test your blood. In the past, there were some types of sicknesses where the way they would treat it was just to like let a whole lot of blood out of your body. They cut you and just let a lot of blood out. These cases are cases where after that, it is sunnah for you to make wudu. Even though having blood taken does not break your wudu, it's sunnah for you to make a wudu afterwards. Next, it says cupping. By cupping, it means hijama, which is a type of medicine practiced by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where they would make very small cuts in your skin at certain places, and then they would heat up like a cup and put the cup on that place, and with the heat, they would suck a small amount of blood out of your body. This is a type of medical treatment called hijama. It's very beneficial to the human being. And this is also a situation where it's recommended to make wudu afterwards. Even though hijama, cupping, does not break your wudu, it is recommended to make wudu if you have this done. Next one mentioned is a nosebleed. If your nose just starts bleeding, this does not break your wudu, according to the Shafi'i madhab, but it's recommended for you to make wudu afterwards. Next, he mentioned slumber. By slumber, what he means is drowsiness. Okay, you know how sometimes when you're really tired, your eyes kind of get heavy, you might even nod a little bit and then wake up, and then return like, oh man, you're kind of nodding off because you're so tired. This is called drowsiness. Drowsiness is not the same thing as sleeping. Okay, if all you are is drowsy, then you haven't broken your wudu yet. Okay, your wudu breaks once you sleep. Okay, it doesn't break due to drowsiness. But if you are drowsy, your head is nodding, you're struggling to stay awake, this is a case where it's recommended for you to make wudu. He says, and sleep whilst sitting, establishing one's bottom. So when we talked about the things that break wudu, that if a person sits with his butt firmly planted on whatever surface he's sitting on, maybe it's the ground, maybe it's a chair, maybe it's the back of an animal, but if he's sitting with his butt firmly planted to the point where it's not possible for him to break wind, we say if he was in that position and he fell asleep, and when he woke up, he was still in that position, we say he did not break his wudu. Okay, this is a case where the person's wudu is not broken, but even though the wudu is not broken, it's what? Recommended for him to make a wudu anyway. This is a time when it's recommended to make wudu. It's sunnah to make wudu in that situation. He says it is recommended to do wudu after vomiting. Okay, vomiting does not break your wudu, but it's sunnah to make wudu if you vomit. Laughing in salah. Okay, if you laugh loudly with sound, laughing like in the salat, this does not break your wudu, but it's sunnah for you to make a wudu if you laugh in the salat. He says, eating from food that has been cooked. This person translated it as on a naked flame, but that's not what's meant here. The Arabs have an expression where they say whatever fire has touched. Okay, he took it literally. He thought it meant food that the flame literally touched it, but that's not what's meant. Like when Arabs say that fire has touched it, they simply mean it was cooked. Okay, heat was applied to it and it cooked. And so eating food that has been cooked, so you can put on a naked flame between brackets as if it's not even there. Eating from food that has been cooked, this is also, by food it means meat. This is also a situation where it's recommended to make wudu. Eating camel meat, okay, if you eat the meat of a camel, this does not break your wudu, but this is a time when it's recommended to make wudu. It says, and from doubt with regards to ritual impurity. So if you're in a situation where you're not sure if you broke wudu or not, you have doubt about it. Remember, we said just at the end of the last chapter, in this situation, you ignore the thing you have doubt about and you go with what you don't have doubt about. So you would conclude that you have wudu and you would continue. But in that very situation, although the ruling of the madhab is that you have wudu, it is what? Recommended for you to make a wudu anyway. Also, as a result of backbiting, if you gossip about someone, if you talk about someone behind their back, it's sunnah to make wudu afterwards. He says here slander. I believe you should cross that out. The Arabic word used here is namima. Namima does not mean slander. Namima means tale bearing, or as we used to say where I grew up, instigating. Okay, namima means you go to one group of people and tell them, so-and-so said this and this and this about y'all. Then you go back to so-and-so and say, man, that group over there, they said this and this and this. You just telling back and forth what the other group said to try to start a conflict. This is called namima. It's called namima, or tale bearing. It doesn't mean slander, because namima doesn't necessarily have to involve any lies. Okay, slander, namima and slander are two different things. But it's recommended in the madhab, if you do namima, for you to make wudu afterwards. He then says lies. If you tell a lie, it's recommended to make wudu afterwards. Cursing, meaning if you insult somebody, it's recommended for you to make wudu afterwards. Foul language, like if you use speech that's vulgar or obscene or otherwise unacceptable in decent company, this is something that it's recommended for you to make wudu afterwards. And also anger. If you get angry, it's recommended for you to make wudu afterwards. This entire list from the beginning of the chapter until now, all of these are things that do not break your wudu. None of these things break your wudu according to the Shafi'i school. Okay? But all of these things are things there's disagreement about. Okay? All the things from the beginning up until the word anger, there are other madhabs that say, for each one of these things, there's a madhab out there that says that thing breaks wudu. Okay, so there are madhabs that say if you have blood drawn, you break your wudu from that. Or if you've had hijama, you break your wudu. Or if you have a nosebleed, you break your wudu. Or if you were heavy-eyed and nodding off, your wudu got broken. And if you sleep with your butt firmly planted, your wudu is broken. If you vomit, if you laugh in the salat, etc. All of the things that were mentioned here, these things in other madhabs are considered to break the wudu. Even though in the Shafi'i school, these things do not break your wudu. And there is something that's a principle in the Shafi'i madhab, which is that it's always recommended for you to exit from a difference of opinion. Okay, the general thought of the madhab is that if you want to be safe, you want to do things in a way that all the madhabs agree is good. Okay, so for example, in the Shafi'i school, when you make your wudu, you don't have to wipe your whole head. You can just wipe a little bit of your head, and that's enough. But in other madhabs, that's not enough. So if you only wiped a little bit of your head, you've chosen to stand in a place where there's difference of opinion about you. Where some madhabs will say you made a valid wudu, and other madhabs would say you did not make a valid wudu. You put yourself within a difference of opinion. So in that case, the Shafi'i madhab says it's recommended, it's sunnah, you're encouraged to wipe your whole head. That way, all of the madhabs will agree that you wiped your head in a valid way. You exited from the difference of opinion. You did it in a way that everyone agrees. Okay, and you see here in this chapter that we're doing now, another example of this principle of the Shafi'i madhab, that when the Shafi'is have a different opinion from the other madhabs, it will usually be recommended for the Shafi'i to therefore act in a way where the other madhabs, to act in a way where he's not going against the other madhabs. Okay, so all these things that were mentioned from the start of the chapter until the word anger, these are all things that other madhabs consider to break your wudu. Even though in the Shafi'i school, we don't consider them to break the wudu, but the simple fact that there's a difference of opinion about it, we therefore recommend you to make a wudu afterwards. Then all of the madhabs will say that you're in the clear. All right, it's sunnah for you to remove yourself from differences of opinion. What remains of this chapter, after the word anger, the rest of the chapter, these things are recommended not because there's difference of opinion about them, but the rest of these things are recommended simply because these are good manners. Okay, and it's a major aspect of our religion to have good manners and to try to protect or try to, preserve and improve one's manners. So it says also, for one wanting to sleep. Okay, so another time when it's recommended to make wudu is when you want to go to sleep. All right, it's recommended to have wudu when you go to sleep. So if you want to go to sleep, if you're intending to go to sleep and you don't have wudu, it's sunnah for you to make wudu. Similarly, when you wake up, when you first wake up from sleep, it's sunnah for you to make wudu. Even if you don't have to pray, it's sunnah for you to make a wudu when you wake up from your sleep. It says, and to read the Quran. Of course, you don't need to have wudu to read the Quran, but it's recommended for you to have wudu when you read the Quran. Yes, you do need to have wudu to touch the Quran, to touch the mushaf, or to carry a mushaf, but you don't need to have wudu just to recite Quran with your tongue. However, it's recommended for you to make wudu if you're going to recite Quran. And hadith. Next, he mentions hadith. It is also recommended for you to have wudu if you're going to be reading hadith. Okay? For Quran and hadith, these two things, it's not only recommended for you to have wudu if you're going to say them, it's also recommended for you to have wudu if you're going to hear them. So if you're going to a class, like a hadith class, it's recommended for you to make wudu before you attend the class, so that you have wudu when you're hearing the blessed hadith. And even if you're going to like a Quran recitation and you yourself are not reciting, if you're going to hear people recite, it's sunnah for you to have wudu. It then says remembering Allah. By that they mean dhikr. So if you're going to be making dhikr, okay, it is recommended for you to have wudu if you're going to make dhikr. It says to sit in a masjid or to pass through it. If you're going to sit in a masjid or even just walk right through, go in one door and out the other door on the other side, whether you're sitting in the masjid or passing through, it's recommended for you to have wudu to do that. Studying knowledge. Whenever you attend a session of knowledge, whether you're the student or the teacher, it's recommended for you to have wudu. Visiting graves. Okay, if you're going to visit the grave of a dead Muslim, it's recommended for you to have wudu. Okay, and you see here what the scholars of the past used to say. This book was written over 200 years ago. Okay, actually, this book was written well over 200 years ago. And he's mentioning the manners of visiting graves, that you should have wudu when you do so. You know, it's very different than what the Wahhabis, the extremists of our times, say. The Wahhabis of our times, they tell you it's haram to visit a grave. Okay, some of them might even go so far as to say it's shirk to visit a grave. But no, the actual scholars of Islam, they say it's recommended to visit graves because the Prophet ﷺ said, I used to forbid you from visiting graves, but visit them because they remind you of death. Okay, the Prophet himself ﷺ abrogated that prohibition of visiting graves. He abrogated it. He says, no, visit them, visit the graves because they remind you of death. All right, so it's actually recommended for us to visit graves. Okay, and if you do visit a grave, it's also recommended for you to have wudu when you do so. And lastly, it says, and for the one who carries the dead corpse or touches it. So anyone who touches a dead corpse of a human being or carries it, say carries it without touching it because he carried it with the shroud. The one who does these things is recommended to do what? To make wudu afterwards. All of these situations in this chapter, all of them are recommended. Okay, wudu is not required in any of these situations. Rather, wudu is recommended. It's sunnah, meaning you get reward if you make wudu in these situations, but there's no harm, there's no threat of punishment if you choose not to make wudu in these situations. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. We'll pick up, insha'Allah, with the next chapter next week, insha'Allah ta'ala. I'm going to look and see if there are questions that I didn't get to. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala to those who salamed me. Someone said, so that part in particular is based off one's intentions. If you're referring to the luggage or the bag that has a mushaf as well as other things in it, then yes, that part depends on your intention. All right. If it's your intention truly to carry all of that stuff, then there's no harm if you don't have wudu, and a mushaf is among the many things in your bag. Okay. But if you're just trying to find a way to carry the mushaf without wudu, so you put a whole bunch of other stuff in the bag with it, stuff that you don't really need, that you don't even really want to move, but you're just trying to avoid making wudu to move your mushaf, but then in that case, it's still haram to move the mushaf. All right. Good. Very few questions this time. All right. Well, in that case, let's say La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah to those who salam me just now. Barakallahu feekum, all of you. May Allah bless you. May Allah keep you safe, grant you success in your affairs, grant you success in the day of judgment, insha'Allah ta'ala. I'll see you next Thursday, insha'Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.